Russian fairy tales usually begin with a place in the 39th Kingdom. It is also the perfect opening sentence for a story about Kaliningrad, the 39th administrative region of the Russian Federation, located between Poland, Lithuania, and the Baltic Sea. This small Russian enclave contains very different truths. Among these facts is the geographical location of Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad is strategically and militarily advantageous for Russia. It is Russia's only year-round ice-free port in the Baltic Sea, and the Russian Baltic Sea Fleet is stationed there. Russia also has nuclear missiles in Kaliningrad, placing them within close range of major European capitals. Another fact is that Kaliningrad is also in the center of the world amber trade. About 90% of the world's amber reserves are located there. These facts make Kaliningrad indispensable for Russia. And does he share the same thoughts in Kaliningrad? Let's take a closer look at what's been happening in this little Russian enclave lately. The days are very active in Kaliningrad, the rebellious western son of Mother Russia. Kaliningrad is much more like Europe, and its residents are proud of its Western-like values. Crisis erupts in Kaliningrad as the Russian-dominated enclave faces isolation and rising tensions. According to activists who have pledged to liberate the private region from Moscow already bogged down in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin could soon face an insurgency on Russia's own border. The tension in Kaliningrad could threaten to fuel demands for Moscow to leave its orbit altogether. Historically, the Prussian city of Königsberg, the enclave, has been under Russian control since the end of the Second World War. Political activists under the banner of the Baltic Republican Party believe that the moment has come for the Russian region located between Poland and Lithuania to side with Europe in pursuing Ukraine and rejecting Putin's rule. Baltic Republican Party leader Rustam Vasilyev said that the region's separation from Moscow is only a matter of time and that Russia has put aside the region's name for Königsberg, which is historically German. Rustam Vasilyev painted an alarming scenario for more than 430,000 residents of Kaliningrad if Russian control continued. While 430,000 Russians from Kaliningrad rebelled against Putin's policies, they sided with the West. A March referendum shows that Russian President Vladimir Putin's lofty ambitions to revive the Soviet Union may be taking an unexpected turn. The idea of secession and the establishment of an independent state seems to have the support of the majority of the citizens of Kaliningrad. According to the survey, 72.1% of respondents in the Kaliningrad region express a desire to leave the Russian Federation. Vasilyev said the worst-case scenario for residents of the Königsberg region is in North Korea in the Baltic Sea. Vasilyev expressed that there is a crisis inside the Königsberg region. The area is isolated from the inside and outside. The Kremlin has direct control over the region. In addition to the separatists, soldiers sent from Kaliningrad to fight in Ukraine are also hoisting the rebel flag. Videos shared on social media platforms in March revealed that the soldiers were in a difficult situation. In one clip, a group of soldiers mobilized from Kaliningrad addresses their commander. Soldiers questioned the whole purpose of Putin's war. At a showdown meeting, the soldiers made it clear that they would not refuse to fight to defend Russian territory as they were enlisted as territorial defense units. However, the soldiers from Kaliningrad announced that they would refuse to attack Ukrainian villages. These soldiers reported that they were willing to even be thrown into prison. He made very striking statements in the video. These soldiers, who were almost thrown from Kaliningrad to the front lines, stated that some of their friends had committed suicide by refusing to fight. Also, some soldiers who refused to fight were thrown into pits dug in the ground by their commanders. Considering what happened, the soldiers decided to share the videos describing their situation and showing the fire of rebellion burning inside them on social media. But numerous video calls to Putin to safely return their men, including wives and mothers in Kaliningrad, were ignored. It is highly probable that this video released by the soldiers will experience the same luck, even if Vladimir Putin ignores the shared videos. A wave of rebellion surrounds the cities of Russia one by one. According to the leader of the Baltic Republican Party, local authorities are sending troops to Ukraine to fight in Ukraine. Moscow and local authorities threaten Europe and feed the local population with anti-Western propaganda. Party leader Vasily Yev said, "One thing is certain for us, in the short or long term. Königsberg is Europe, as it is known." Königsberg has a long history dating back to 1255 when it was founded on the grounds of a Prussian settlement. It later became the capital of East Prussia and the ceremonial city for the coronations of the Prussian monarchy from 1466 to 1657. The city was under Polish control as a principality. Russia took Königsberg, also known as Królewec, by conquest in 1945. However, it may not be surprising that Vladimir Putin, who was defeated in the Ukraine war, also lost Kaliningrad to his own people. These critical situations for the Russian Federation are not only experienced in Kaliningrad. A series of revolts are also breaking out in the heart of Russia. The riots that started with the Russian leader's declaration of mobilization are repeated from time to time. Men who do not want to take part in Putin's war find the solution by rebelling. The revolt of Russian men is supported by their mothers, wives, and Russian women. The fire of rebellions is also engulfing the important centers of Russia. Critical centers become targets for rebels. We see the reflections of the revolts in Russian cities. In the Moscow army, soldiers in the Russian army are rioting due to the lack of basic items such as insufficient equipment, ammunition, and food. For example, last month, Russian soldiers refused to sign a contract to fight for Wagner. Things got worse when the soldiers refused to sign a contract. The Russian soldiers who refused to sign these contracts disappeared. In this case, it's revealed another dimension of the revolts. It's obvious that Vladimir Putin could not resist the riots. Faced with social disintegration, it's a matter of curiosity. What will be the next move of Putin? We will wait and see this move of the Russian leader. In another development, the Russian location in Kaliningrad has long been a nightmare for NATO's defense planners. Many scenarios emerged in this process. The first scenario occurs when Russia's definitive defeat in Ukraine led to the collapse of Alexander Lukashenko's regime. The cessation of economic support from Russia to Belarus could lead to a cascade of crisis strikes and civil unrest, with parts of the armed forces eventually changing their allegiance. The Belarusian volunteer forces fighting against the Russians in Ukraine could be decisive here. If Belarus changes sides, the consequences for the Russian garrison in Kaliningrad will be enormous. Already exhausted from supplying troops to the war in Ukraine, the military post would find itself surrounded by hostile forces. It can also be expected that the Lithuanian government will join Poland to squeeze Kaliningrad. It would not result in the official demilitarization of the enclave, but over time the situation of his garrison would resemble that of the Russian outpost in Transnistria in Moldova. The economy of the enclave would likewise deteriorate, but the sanctions regime will prevent any overland imports. It would leave shipping the only lifeline, and Russian ships would have a hard time finding foreign ports at reasonable distances to accept them. A middle way outcome is possible, with Russia suffering a decisive loss in Ukraine, but with Belarus still messing things up. Under this scenario, the country offers a perspective for the Kremlin to expand its future influence towards Kaliningrad and the EU. But it would be a weak link in constant danger of breaking. Yet the outcome of the Ukrainian war will greatly affect its future. The greatest strength of an army is its reputation. The biggest reason for defense spending all over the world is deterrence. All states that want to be protected from the attacks of other countries increase their military power. As a result of the increase in military power, the reputation of the army rises more. This discourages other countries from attacking. Russia has been doing a lot of work to improve the reputation of its military for a long time. In his speeches, Putin has repeatedly said that the Russian army is the strongest in the world. Moreover, the Russian army had a total of 1,014,000 active and 2 million reserve soldiers. According to the data, the Russian army was considered to be the second largest army in the world in terms of the number of soldiers. Russia also boasted of having very powerful tanks. The Russian army, which frequently practiced drills, threatened the whole world, but it turned out that the Russian army was quite unsuccessful militarily. The latest news from the battlefield showed once again having experienced Russian soldiers are. There were major accidents due to the lack of training of Russian soldiers. The videos taken on the battlefield stunned everyone. Let's take a look at what is happening in the Russian army. You can use the super thanks button below the video to support independent journalism. If you have done so, let's continue talking about the latest developments on the battlefield. Dozens of Russian soldiers are stationed in the Russian city of Kursk on the border with Ukraine. These soldiers received their final training in this region before being sent to the front line. All Russian soldiers who come to Kursk experienced great fear because when they come to this region, they start to hear the sounds of missiles at the front. Russian soldiers try to hit the targets by aiming in this area. However, soldiers who do not receive adequate training have difficulty in hitting the targets. Russian soldiers constantly make mistakes due to the fear they are experiencing. Finally, Russian soldiers made a big mistake while lighting a stove. The soldiers made a fire right next to the ammunition depot. They were planning to cook on this fire with large cauldrons. However, the tube exploded due to the intensity of the fire. As a result of the fire, the flames reached the ammunition depot. According to the preliminary findings, at least 6 Russian soldiers were died in this explosion. 15 Russian soldiers were reportedly wounded. The ammunition depot also caught fire. It is not known exactly how much ammunition was in the warehouse. Russian fire brigade was sent to the area after the explosion. The Russian press thought that this explosion was the result of an attack. This was the first news that appeared in the press. This caused Russian soldiers to experience more fear. The news of the war spreading to Russian territory also angered the Russian people. Russian citizens posted on their social media accounts and said that this war must end as soon as possible. However, the truth soon emerged. Everyone saw that this explosion was the fault of Russian soldiers, but this made the Russian people even more angry. Russian citizens were outraged by the lack of adequate security measures and the deployment of inexperienced soldiers. News from the battlefield has made the Russians even more angry. In recent days, the fighting in the trenches has become more intense, especially in the trenches in the Bakhmut region. Very close clashes are taking place. The distances between Russian and Ukrainian soldiers are less than 20 meters. There are very close clashes between the two armies. However, the Russian army is also very unsuccessful in these clashes. In a report in the Russian press today, it was seen that the machine gun melted. All weapons heat up as soon as a bullet is fired, then fired one after the other. The barrels of the guns heat up like red-hot iron. That's why soldiers often change their weapons or wait a bit while firing. But the Russian soldiers are also very inexperienced in this. The Russian soldiers panicked when they saw the Ukrainian soldiers and fired for a long time. Soldiers who took over the machine guns spent hundreds of rounds of ammunition. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian soldiers waited quietly in their trenches. The barrels of the machine guns and the Russian army started to melt after a while, so the weapons became unusable. It was at this moment that the Ukrainian soldiers came out of their trenches and started firing. This operation was the biggest proof of how cowardly and inexperienced the Russian soldiers were. However, the incidents showing the incompetence of the Russian army are not limited to these. Another video from the trenches in Bakhmut has been viewed millions, as oft times on social media. In this video of the battle recorded by Ukrainian soldiers, the strange movements of the Russian soldiers drove attention. Successful soldiers of the Ukrainian army apply a strong tactic. However, Russian soldiers come out of the trenches in a completely undisciplined manner. Russian soldiers failed to target the trenches. None of the grenades thrown reached the trenches. Ukrainian soldiers mocked the Russian soldiers during this battle. The brave and relaxed demeanor of the Ukrainian soldiers attracts everyone's attention. Russian soldiers are operating in great fear. The fear of the soldiers is not the only problem in the Russian army. There is also a major management crisis. The problem of coordination between Russian commanders has reached an extraordinary level. The Russian army seems to be completely lacking military discipline. As a result, the plans of the Russian army are in constant disarray. Many Russian soldiers are fed up. Today, Russian soldiers made a video in which they talk about their problems. The 504th Tank Regiment is fed up with the long-standing problems. This regiment was sent for training in the Omsk region for Russia, but after the training was over, they were forgotten. These entrained soldiers were called back to the battlefield a month later, but the soldiers did not have the skills to drive a tank. They tried to explain this to their commanders, but no one paid any attention to them. This unit is constantly sent to different locations and is not fully under the command of any commander. Describing this situation, the soldier said, "We have completely lost contact with our command. The only officer left with us is the chief of artillery. But he said, 'I'm not your commander.' We don't know who our commander is now." The Russian commander we spoke to in Donetsk told us that our unit was disbanded, but we are not allowed to return home. For a long time, the Russian soldiers remained in limbo, but the problem is still not solved as the soldiers continue to describe their strange situation, saying, "We were told that the 504th Regiment was disbanded and that we now belong to the Army of the Donetsk People's Republic." Voyevodin retrained as infantrymen, but after going to several shooting ranges, they asked for money for bullets. This meant that we were no longer accepted as soldiers. In this situation, we wanted to return home, but we were not allowed to do that either. We were detained here. We are not allowed to do anything. The Russian soldiers were very angry during the conversation. The Russian army is so badly run that even Russian soldiers are fed up with it. Russian soldiers are very frustrated. The soldiers in the video also emphasized that there are many soldiers in the same situation as them. These problems experienced by Russian soldiers are constantly on the agenda in Russia. Putin's reputation has been badly damaged by this news. War experts all over the world have started to write reports about how weak the Russian army actually is. No country is afraid of Russia anymore. Russia is going through the worst period in history. Every bad video coming from the front line is further discrediting the Russian army by invading Ukraine. Putin planned to secure the whole world and strengthen his authority. However, thanks to the historic defense of the Ukrainian army, the Russian army was completely disorganized. The Russian army was disgraced as a result of sending troops to the front. Putin is living a nightmare. Do you think this crisis in the Russian army will end? What do you think about the inexperience of Russian soldiers? Who do you think is responsible for the crisis in the Russian army? Do you think Russia can regain its reputation? How do you think this process will end? Ukrainians conducted a series of very successful hammer strikes. As mentioned last time, the activation of Ukrainian HIMARS crews is explained by the relocation of Russian troops to the Bakhmut direction because it creates a perfect opportunity for identifying, tracking, and destroying enemy forces concentrations. The target of the first strike once again became Mariupol. Local residents reported hearing several explosions. One photo clearly shows the aftermath of the air defense work. The picture was quickly analyzed for geolocation, and after determining from which building a person took a photo and determining the direction of the trajectory, it became clear that Russian air defense was shooting down the rockets near the industrial area. As of style, this is where Russians reportedly use a lot of facilities as warehouses for equipment. In the meantime, more information became available about yesterday's strike. Yesterday, I showed you that Ukrainians hit unspecified buildings near the airfield. Today, satellite footage became available of this area showing that Hamas rockets hit the center of the building. Ukrainian sources reported that there was an underground facility that was used as a high-level command post of the Russian forces that are operating in the Volodar and Zaporizhia areas. The Ukrainian Mariupol mayoral advisor reported that 24 troops were killed and 37 were wounded as a result of strikes on other facilities. Russians also lost a lot of vehicles of various types from cars to APCs because today local residents noticed how Russians were transporting the destroyed machinery through the city. Another target of yet another strike became Tokmak. Local residents reported hearing multiple explosions, which was later confirmed by the Russian-appointed head of the region. He stated that there was at least 2 explosions and that more information would become available later. Hammer strikes were also recorded in the Donetsk region. Russian independent investigative outlet reported that a Ukrainian hammer strike destroyed up to 1090 tanks east of Marinka. Overall, it looks like by destabilizing the situation on the Bakhmut flanks and forcing the Russians to send reinforcements, Ukrainians managed to destroy more heavy equipment during the relocation and during the storming operation of the flanks that Russians tried to reinforce. And the frequency and intensity of HIMARS strike will continue to increase, especially as Norway and the UK recently agreed to supply Ukraine with 8 artillery systems M2-170, which is like HIMARS but has twice as many rockets. When it comes to Bakhmut itself, after another night of surviving some of the most intense shelling with incendiary munitions, some Ukrainian soldiers reported that the last units that were still present on the outskirts of Bakhmut finally received an order to withdraw to Ivanovskaya. This is corroborated by multiple videos of Ukrainians driving out of the southern outskirts towards Ivanovsky and also by the fact that Russians are mostly shelling the tree lines between Bakhmut and Ivanovskaya. The head of the Wagner Group, Prigozhin, made the video saying that today, after 24 days of continuous storming operations, the battle for Bakhmut has ended. He admitted that Ukrainian fighters put up immense resistance and that in 5 days he planned to transfer the responsibility for the region to the regular Russian army and withdraw to the Dnieper to heal and replenish from the damage incurred. At this stage, we do not know whether the Wagner Group will be allowed to withdraw or whether the Russian Ministry of Defense will once again threaten Prigozhin with charges of treason in case he leaves his position. In any case, the first battle for Bakhmut ended, and the most important question is what comes next. Some analysts are saying that now with the city secured, Russian forces will easily recapture the ground around Bakhmut. However, if we look at the topographic map, we can see that the ground around Bakhmut is actually a tactical heights which took Russians months to take, especially in the south. Recent footage from the home of origin clearly shows that the city is located in the valley, meaning that Russians would need to fight from a disadvantageous position. That is why many Ukrainian fighters are calling the Russian victory a Pyrrhic victory. Russians got so focused on the city and the idea of declaring the whole city taken that they lost all tactical heights in the process. Now, the Ukrainians have almost secured all tactical heights in front of Jessivir. They can either continue the movement along the ridges to take Bakhmut into a pocket or stop here and conduct defensive operations. Unlike Bakhmut, VR is located on a hill, not a valley, which means that storm in Jessivir will likely be much more difficult than storming Bakhmut. But it looks like Ukrainians decided not to stop. The fighters on the ground continue reporting advances on the flanks, especially south of Bakhmut. Here, after securing this huge piece of territory, Ukrainians continue to reporting about securing from 100 to 150 meters per day. Some military analysts are calling it a Pyrrhic victory as well, but for a different reason. They said that while Russian forces allocated their best forces to fight in the battle for Solidary battle for Bakhmut and now Bakhmut flanks, Ukrainians never engaged their strategic reserves. And this is entirely correct because the Ukrainian 9th and 10th Corps continue to stay in the deep rear and prepare for large-scale offensive actions. This puts Russians in significant danger because, while their most capable units have been degraded in the battles of no strategic significance, Ukrainians have been sending their most capable troops overseas for intense training, and they have been accumulating Western equipment to equip these forces. The fact that these reserves have not yet been engaged suggests that Ukrainians are yet to deliver their main blow.